You believe the past is behind you just because the days have changed. That hurt has already been digested just because you've learned to talk about it without crying. You think you've moved on because you now have new plans, new goals, a new version of yourself that seems more mature, more spiritual, more aware. But then, suddenly, everything you swore you'd left behind resurfaces, in the emotions that explode without explanation, in the conversation that throws you off balance, in the type of person you attract without meaning to, in the automatic reaction that seems to have a life of its own, as if something is pulling you back to a place you swore you'd never return to. And that's when the cycle begins again. The same frustrations with different faces, the same limitations with new names, the same dreams and the same silent resignations that come soon after. You try to understand, but I've been through this before. I've done the work, I've prayed, I've cleared, I've written, I've meditated, I've let go. So why does it feel like your life is stuck in a loop? As if, no matter how much time passes, a part of you remains stuck, in a point in the past that no one can see but you feel. You feel it in your body, in your chest, in your choked voice, in the tension that returns every time you get closer to what you desire. You feel it when it seems the universe has forgotten you. But the universe hasn't forgotten anything. It simply continues to respond to your vibration. And what no one told you is that time at the quantum level isn't a straight line like you learned in school. It's a field, a vibrational ocean where all possible moments, past, present, and future, coexist. And what determines where you live isn't what you want, but what moment you're energetically collapsing into. This means that even if the clock says it's today, your field could be repeating yesterday. You might wake up in a new body, in a new phase, with a new mindset, but still be stuck in the echo of an old version of yourself. A version that lives on not because you want it to, but because you're still in resonance with it. And that's why you can try to change everything and still feel the same. Because you can change the surface. But if you don't change what sustains your vibration, the loop continues. Not out of punishment, but out of coherence. Quantum reality can only give you what corresponds to your deepest energetic signature, what you still carry when no one is looking, what you don't post on Instagram, what can't be put into words but expresses itself in silence, in your impulses, in the choices you repeat even when you swear they'll be different now. You're not living in the past by choice, but you're reacting to the present as someone still being controlled by it. This is the blind spot of most seekers, thinking that time heals everything when in fact it is frequency that heals. Because time alone doesn't erase anything. It only hides what you didn't have the structure to process, and what is ignored emotionally is repeated energetically. That's why certain pains keep returning. That's why certain lessons aren't completed. Because you're trying to build the new on the vibrational foundations of the old, and the field feels it. The field responds. The field doesn't need words, it needs coherence. And this coherence isn't achieved with force or effort, but with radical presence. Because quantum time doesn't respect the calendar, it responds to your vibrational stability. And as long as this stability is based on unintegrated memories, on narratives that still define you, on emotions you still avoid, the loop continues. No matter how much you meditate, no matter how much you desire, no matter how many courses you take. Because it's not the content of your mind that anchors the new reality. It's the frequency of your body. It's the energetic tone of your silent identity, the one you wear without realizing it, the one that still believes it needs to protect itself, that it needs to repeat, that it needs to survive, even if it means reliving. And perhaps now you're feeling, with a little more clarity, that the problem was never what you do, but what still drives you. The loop isn't outside, it's inside, recorded in your cells, hidden in your triggers, programmed in the emotional automatisms you inherited, learned, and memorized as being you. But you're not this pattern, you're simply collapsed by it. And that's what we're going to explore together now, because if there's one thing quantum physics has proven, it's that the collapse can be stopped, the field can be realigned, and the loop finally can be broken. This breakdown you keep repeating, this life that always seems to revolve around the same pains, the same absences, the same recycled emotional stories, is not bad luck, karma, or spiritual punishment. It's a quantum time loop, a closed circuit of energy where the past still pulses as if it were present, not in chronological time, but in the field. And in the field, everything that has not been integrated, everything that has been frozen in the form of trauma, attachment, or guilt, continues to vibrate with the same intensity as when it occurred. You may have changed your home, your profession, your appearance. You may have adopted new routines, new spiritual practices, new ideas about yourself. But if within you the memory of the past still governs your vibration, the field will continue to collapse the reality that matches that signature. Because that's how the mechanics of creation work. You don't attract what you desire. You attract what confirms your most constant frequency. And quantum loops are just that, vibrational confirmation circuits. Every time you try to break out of a pattern but unconsciously expect it to return, the field records it. Every time you affirm something new but feel something old, the field records it. Every time you act as if you're free but secretly fear falling back, the field records it. And this constant recording reinforces the collapse of the same reality, not out of punishment, but out of vibrational fidelity. Imagine time not as a straight line, but as a field with multiple folds. Each fold is activated by frequency. You may even think you're moving forward, but if your frequency is collapsed into the fold of a memory, that's where your reality will be pulled. This is why you can change the surface of your life and still feel the same, because the field doesn't read words, it reads signals. And as long as your signal is the same as the one that sustained your past, the collapse will be the same. Time seems to move, but you only change the names of the scenes, the people, the stories. The essence remains the same. And perhaps no one has explained this to you clearly, that there are emotional memories that don't die with time, but live on through vibrational repetition, that there are parts of you still living in an old moment, not because you want them to, but because your frequency still recognizes that moment as a reference, as if the past has become an invisible anchor, a hidden axis around which your life revolves, even when it seems to be moving forward. The name of this is loop stabilization. It happens when the field realizes that frequency is being transmitted consistently enough to become dominant, and what is dominant for the field becomes collapsible. Reality molds itself to this pattern as a precise response. The same type of relationship, the same financial crisis, the same rejection disguised as opportunity, the same silence where there should be recognition, the same anxiety with different names, the same doubt with new phrases. None of this is coincidence. It is energetic repetition with quantum precision. And if this sounds familiar, it's not because you're failing. It's because you're vibrationally stabilized with an old version of yourself, not by conscious choice, but by automatic programming. It's the kind of repetition that doesn't show up on your calendar, but defines your experiences. And the most challenging thing is that this pattern is so constant, so silent that you start calling it life, as if there were no other way to feel, react, live, as if time were cyclical by nature. But it isn't. Time only repeats itself when you keep collapsing the same frequency. And you collapse this frequency not when you want to, but when you feel it, when you react, when you return to what formed you but no longer serves you. The past doesn't visit you. You update it with every untransformed emotion, with every automatic response, with every pattern that continues to be nurtured in your field, even after so many practices, books, and rituals. This is where many people give up, when they realize time isn't enough to change, because they expected the clock to heal what, in fact, requires presence. The field doesn't understand dates. It understands energetic coherence. And coherence isn't what you think when you're aligned. It's what you vibrate when you're vulnerable, when you're silent, when you react without realizing it, when you believe no one is watching. This is where the field collapses, and this is where the loops perpetuate. But if you're beginning to notice the cycle, if you're seeing the pattern behind the repetitions, if something in you recognizes that it's no longer about what's happening outside, but about the frequency still held within, then perhaps for the first time you're accessing the point where time stops repeating itself. Because loops only continue as long as they're sustained, and the moment you see them without judgment is already the beginning of the collapse. You begin to realize that time, from the field's perspective, doesn't move. It echoes. It reverberates like a sustained note that runs through your days, even when the scenery seems to have changed. And this echo isn't fueled by conscious memories, but by a vibration that has become imprinted. An energetic signature that has lodged itself in the body and silently emits the same frequency as always. This is where the loops become deeper. Because they're not just repetitions of experiences, they're repetitions of perception. The world you see is filtered by how you've learned to feel, and the way you feel is a direct reflection of what your nervous system has considered safe for too long. Even if that safe came from situations of pain, scarcity, and absence. The body doesn't want the best, it wants the familiar, because the familiar for it is survival. You may even desire a new reality, but if your system is still organized around the old one, that new reality will always seem distant, or fleeting, or impossible to sustain. And it's not because it doesn't exist, but because you're still vibrationally positioned elsewhere, a place that has become your emotional home. Even if it hurts you, even if it limits you, even if it exhausts you, there's a place inside you that still calls this pattern home. And this isn't something you see clearly, because it doesn't hurt like it used to. It's not a screaming trauma, it's a heavy silence, a subtle emptiness, a discomfort you've already normalized, a basic tension that has become the backdrop to your state of being. You wake up with it, you walk with it, you make decisions with it. And without realizing it, your life begins to revolve around maintaining this pattern, not because you want it to, but because you've been trained to do so. This is how the loop strengthens. When you stop calling it a loop and start calling it you. You believe you're being consistent, but you're just being conditioned. The emotions that repeatedly arise don't come because the world is testing your faith. They come because your field is still trapped in the signature these emotions carry. You might call it anxiety, fear of rejection, insecurity. But the name doesn't matter. What matters is that, at the deepest level, you're trying to protect something. An ancient piece of yourself that has learned to manage pain by creating predictability. Predictability is what sustains the loop. If you know exactly how it will feel to be ignored, to be criticized, to fail, that gives you control. Even if it's painful control. And control to the subconscious is better than the unknown. That's why so many people choose unconsciousness. Not because they don't want to wake up, but because being who you never were is scarier than repeating who you always were. This is the point where the past becomes identity, where frequency becomes a pattern, where time folds in on itself, and you, without realizing it, fold in with it. And no matter how many spiritual practices you apply, how many phrases you repeat, how many videos you watch, if you're still collapsing your reality from the vibrational version born of pain, nothing truly new can sustain itself. Because the field doesn't respond to your hope, it responds to your rootedness. And this grounding happens when you stop seeing loops as something that holds you back, and start seeing them as something that reveals you. Each repetition isn't here to punish you, it's to show you what you're still stuck with, what story still defines you, what emotion still governs you, what narrative you still call truth. And when you begin to see the loop with this clarity, no drama, no resistance, no rush to get out of it, it begins to lose its power. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped reinforcing it with his reaction. And that's the first sign that time is about to rearrange itself. Not out there, but within you. You spend your life trying to escape the past as if it were chasing you, as if there were an external force constantly pulling you to the same places of pain, to the same people who can't see, to the same situations where you shrink to fit. But what if it's not the past pulling you? What if it's you still vibrating with it? Because the most uncomfortable, yet most liberating truth is that you're not stuck because the past has power. You're stuck because you still vibrate like someone who belongs to it. And until this vibration is interrupted, time continues to double. The cycle continues to spin, and reality continues to mirror. Not what you want, but what you still are when you're vulnerable, when you're exhausted, when you're not trying to protect yourself. And this vibration isn't a rational choice. You don't wake up and say, "Today I'm going to collapse the worst parts of me." It's something more subtle. It's the body that recoils when someone looks at you a certain way. It's your voice that changes when you sense rejection. It's the look in your eyes that fades before disappointment even sets in. It's the micro reactions that happen on the invisible plane before any thought can justify them. And at that very point, the loop resets itself, because the field, silent, needs only a coherent signal. And coherence on the quantum plane isn't what you say, it's what you vibrate deep within your being. That's why life can seem so unfair sometimes, because you try hard, you try to change, you sincerely want something new. But the field isn't responding to your sincerity, it's responding to your energetic stability. And if what's stable within you is an old pattern, that's what will be reflected back. Not out of malice, but out of precision. And the more you try to escape it without integrating, the more the cycle intensifies. Because there's a point at which the attempt to rid yourself of the pain becomes the very fuel for the loop. You reject the feeling you carry. You react to it. You fight it. You call it a spiritual failure. And all of this, even with the best of intentions, strengthens the frequency you're trying to escape. Because where there's resistance, there's fixation. And where there's fixation, the collapse repeats itself. So no, it's not the past that's returning. It's your frequency that hasn't yet been redirected. It's your energy that even unconsciously still finds comfort in repeating what it knows. And until this movement is consciously interrupted, time will continue to reverberate like an internal echo. And you'll think you're being chased, when in fact, you're just following a path you yourself vibrate without realizing it. This may sound harsh, but it's not harsh. It's lucid. Because if the past doesn't hold you back, if you're the one who still holds it back, then there's something no one has ever told you clearly. You can stop now. You can decide not to respond in the same way anymore. You can deactivate the trigger. Stop the gesture. Breathe at the moment your frequency begins to collapse the old world. You can say no, with your body, even before your mind rationalizes. And this no doesn't have to be performative, nor spiritualized. It just needs to be true. True in the rawest sense, no longer compatible, no longer you. And here lies the turning point, when you no longer need an explanation to stop repeating. When you no longer need the world to prove something wrong, you feel it in your body. You feel that that frequency is no longer your place. It doesn't matter if it still comes dressed as temptation, comfort, or promise. You acknowledge it, and that acknowledgement begins to dissolve the loop. No drama, no announcement, no ritual, only with presence. Because when your frequency stops responding to the old stimulus, the field can no longer collapse to the same result. The structure breaks, the timeline rearranges itself, the mirror becomes opaque, and what once seemed an inevitable fate begins to lose consistency. This is the first crack in the cycle, the first wrinkle of time that unties, and time can finally begin to move forward. Not because the past has been forgotten, but because it is no longer being vibrationally supported. And that's when you begin to live a reality where what comes next, it is not repetition, it is response, a response to your new signature, to your new presence, to the silence where before there was only noise. You don't have to wait for the universe to prove you're ready. The universe is already listening to you all the time. And what it hears aren't words. It's not affirmations or future plans. It hears what you transmit when you're not trying to manifest anything, when you just breathe, when you just exist, when no one is watching you and you return in silence to your base frequency. It is this silent tone that the field collapses. And that is why true change begins at the least visible point of all, the point where you stabilize a new frequency without seeking guarantees, without expecting results, without demanding that the world change first. You change, and the world reorganizes itself, not out of obedience, but out of vibrational coherence. Because at the most subtle level of creation, time is not a flow, it is a mirror. And the mirror doesn't respond to what you pretend to be, it responds to what you sustain when you stop performing. When you're not trying to be vibrationally high, but just at peace with the absence of the old man. This is what the field interprets as readiness. And here, something even more profound happens. You realize that it's no longer necessary to overcome the past. You don't need to defeat the version that hurt you. You don't need to fight the pattern that shaped you. All you need is stop holding on to the thread that keeps you alive. Because the old frequency has no power of its own. It thrives on repetition. It feeds on your attachment, on your insistence on returning to it every time you feel small. And for this very reason, the most powerful moment of manifestation is not when you affirm the new. It's when you stop reacting to the old. It's in this space, between the old impulse and the new choice, that time bends in your favor. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped reinforcing the previous version. And the field, always seeking coherence, reorganizes reality around your new point of stability. Even if it's fragile, even if it's recent, even if you're still learning to live from it. Because the universe doesn't demand perfection, it responds to consistency. Vibrational consistency is not rigidity. It's not pretending everything is fine. It's not always being aligned. It's realized when you're slipping back into the old and choosing to stay in the new. Even if it hurts, even if it seems strange, even if no one understands. It is in this silent act of presence, in this small gesture of not giving in to the old impulse, that a new reality begins to take shape. And it begins like everything real, with a feeling, a peace that has no justification, a sigh that comes without reason, a slight shift from center. You're still in the same place on the outside, but inside, something has changed. And this change, still unspoken, is already magnetic. It's already emitting a new signal. It's already collapsing a new version of time. And maybe no one notices this from the outside. Not yet. But the field notices. The field responds. The field turns. You may not see the result immediately, but somewhere, outside your linear perception, a reality began to reorganize itself. The timeline that once held you captive began to lose coherence. The mirror that only reflected the past began to fog. And amidst this fogging, you sense a new possibility, no longer as a desire, but as a frequency. This possibility doesn't need to be fueled by constant affirmations. It doesn't need to be pushed to happen. It just needs to be inhabited with truth. You don't ask for more. You position yourself as someone who is already compatible with her. And this positioning is silent. It's intimate. It's not proven with words. It's proven with vibration. Because now you understand, you don't need to create a new world with effort. You just need to stop collapsing the old one. The new is already in the field. The timeline where you are free already exists. It's not distant, it's vibrationally separate, and that's what can change now. You're no longer trying to escape the past. You're becoming someone the past can relate to, is no longer compatible. And that's the true breakthrough. The point where the reality that has always haunted you stops recognizing you, stop responding, stop collapsing, and the silence that remains is freedom. This is where almost no one understands what's happening. Just when you begin to sustain a new frequency, something strange happens. The old returns, but not just as a distant whisper. It returns as a scream. The same person appears. The same feeling explodes. The same dynamic repeats itself with a force you thought you'd already overcome. And your mind begins to doubt. Wasn't I changing? Why is this happening again? This is where the old pattern tries to rescue you. Not because you're failing, but because it's moving away from him more intensely than ever. Quantum loops are intelligent. They have a kind of vibrational intelligence. They've been sustained for years, perhaps decades, perhaps lifetimes. They know exactly how to sound genuine. They know the tone of voice that still triggers your fear. They know how to sound like love when in fact they're attached. They know how to disguise themselves as entitlement when they're just repetition. And the moment you start to leave, they test your stability. They don't do this because they're evil. They do it because you've long programmed them as a safety default. And now that you start emitting a new signal, the entire field, your mind, your body, your reality, enters a state of vibrational dissonance. It's not a regression. It's an energetic conflict between what you've always been and what you're beginning to become. Between the timeline that has always collapsed and the one that is now beginning to become viable. And this conflict doesn't come with soft lighting and relaxing music. It comes with confusion, with unwarranted anxiety, with small emotional tragedies that seem unfair, with sudden fatigue, with that thought you thought you'd overcome, but which returns with a vengeance. It's your body trembling. It's your breath shortening. It's the feeling of being on edge, even when from the outside, nothing serious seems to be happening. This is not a failure. This is vibrational transition. It's the moment when the old frequency knows it's about to lose its home, and it screams. It tries to remind you that it can still protect you, that it's still safer than the emptiness that comes before the new reality materializes. Because that's what you feel, a void, an uncomfortable absence of references. You're no longer trapped as before, but you haven't yet stabilized in the new. You're in the space between, and the space between is the territory where almost everyone falls back. Not because they are not strong, but because they were not warned that this discomfort is the portal itself. It's at this threshold that most people misunderstand the process. They believe the resurgence of the standard means nothing has changed, that it was all for nothing, that they're not good enough. But it's quite the opposite. The stronger the pattern returns, the clearer the signal that it is losing strength, because now he needs to shout. Before he whispered, and you obeyed. Now he needs to express himself emotionally because you're no longer responding automatically. This difference is subtle, but it's everything. You still feel, but you're already observing. It still hurts, but you're already clear. There's still a reaction, but with it comes a space, however small, for choice. You begin to perceive the game. You begin to see what was once automatic. You begin to identify the narrative that was dragging you and that now tries to seduce you for the last time. And this is where you decide, not with words, not with statements, but with presence. You decide, stay, not in the standard, but in the new frequency, even without guarantees, even without knowing what comes next. You decide not to give in to the urge to run back to the old just because it's familiar. You decide to breathe, to feel, to allow the discomfort to burn away what remains of the old, because this burning is purification. It is liberation. It is the silent reorganization of time. You're at the exact point where the loop breaks. If you stay, if you don't give in to the urge to interpret discomfort as a sign of error, if you just keep walking like someone who no longer aligns with what they've always held, you don't have to fight the pattern. You just have to let it collapse without your cooperation. And for that, one gesture is all it takes, not react as before. This is the true point of no return. The moment when the field begins to organize a new reality, not because you begged for it, but because the old one no longer resonates. And without resonance, there is no collapse. Without collapse, there is no repetition. And without repetition, there is space. And this space, however uncomfortable it may seem now, is the silent womb of the new era. You are between two worlds. You're no longer completely within the old, but you still don't feel comfortable in the new. And this space, this non-place, is what we call vibrational transition, an invisible territory where the past no longer recognizes you and the future is still unformed. Here nothing is familiar, not what you feel, not how you react, not who you're becoming. And that's precisely why everything seems more difficult than ever. Not because you are wrong, but because you are being remade. The body still tries to respond as before. The mind tries to create stories that make sense. The nervous system wants to get back on track. But you feel, in a way you can't explain, that these tracks no longer lead anywhere. They spin in circles. They no longer fit you. They no longer support the expansion that has begun to occur within you. And that's why now, every movement requires more presence than strength. You're being stretched from within. Between the version of you that learned to survive vibrating in fear and the version that's beginning to emerge in the field, vibrating in confidence, in lightness, in truth. But this new version is still subtle. It's still fragile. It's still rehearsing how to occupy its space. And in this rehearsal, everything that was automatic needs to be unlearned. Every reaction needs to be felt. Every old impulse needs to be interrupted without being rejected. You won't crush your old self to grow. You will acknowledge it. Look at it honestly, with compassion, because it was the one who brought you here. It was the one who bore the pains you are now healing. It was the one who held the emotional fabric of your world until you were ready to dissolve it. And now you are. But transition requires more than desire. It requires de-identification. Disidentifying is not pretending you don't feel. It's to stop believing that what you feel is who you are. It's allowing fear to emerge without letting it take over. It's seeing the old thought emerge and not following it. It's listening to the voice that says you can't do it and keeping going. Not as someone who needs to overcome their own mind, but as someone who already knows that this voice no longer has vibrational authority. This disidentification may feel strange because you still remember the pain, but you're no longer willing to repeat it. You still feel the urge, but you can now choose differently. You still hear the invitation to return, but you already know you no longer belong in that cycle. This is where the new begins to settle in, not with clarity, but with lightness, like a breeze you barely notice, like a gesture that was once impossible and now happens effortlessly, like a no said firmly, like a yes given truthfully, like a reaction that doesn't come, like a tear that flows but heals, because suddenly you understand, it's not about fighting who you were. It's about to continue vibrating as who you are no longer. And this movement isn't dramatic, it's subtle, it's repetitive, it's internal. It's the kind of decision no one sees, but the entire field feels. And the field begins to respond, not with applause, but with small misalignments. Things that once worked begin to fall apart. People who seemed right begin to walk away. Places that welcomed you lose their luster. You think you're losing, but in reality, it is changing frequency. The field is clearing what doesn't match who you are becoming. It's dislodging what was held by your old vibration. It's reorganizing everything from the inside out. And you feel the new version is no longer an ideal. It's a reality under construction, a house that's still being built while the old one is being dismantled. And in this in-between, you have no walls, no guarantees, only presence, only the truth, only your own field. And the field begins to behave like a clean mirror, a mirror that now begins to reflect who you are truly becoming. It's not about getting somewhere, it's about stop going back to the old. And if you can do this for one more day, even in fear, even in silence, even without evidence, then you're already living outside the loop, because the loop only needs one thing to continue, your participation. And you're slowly removing yourself from the plot, leaving the script, letting go of the role. And that's vibrational freedom. The field is already listening to you, but it doesn't listen to the words. It listens to the body. You may think you're manifesting with your mind, but in reality, what transmits the strongest signal of your reality isn't what you think. It's what you feel without realizing it. It's the energetic tone of your nervous system. It's the emotion you've learned to call normal. It's the state of contraction you don't even know you carry. It's the knot in your stomach before making a decision. The tightness in your chest that you think is just fatigue. The tension in your jaw that has become a landscape. The body is the transmission tower of your vibrational identity. And that's why, even when you change your thoughts, repeat new affirmations, write new intentions, the field can still respond to the old one, because the body is still vibrating as before. Not out of bad faith, not out of resistance, but out of loyalty. The body is not your enemy, it is the guardian of your survival. It was trained to keep you safe, even if it costs you your expansion. And safety for it is what you've experienced many times before, not what you desire. So, if you've lived in anxiety, scarcity, invisibility, and tension for a long time, your body will seek to replicate this, because there it knows what to expect. There it has control. There it feels in command. The new, however beautiful it may seem, is still a place where the body doesn't know if it can relax. And that's why it pulls. It pulls you back into emotional patterns that seemed overcome. It convinces you you're in danger when everything is going well. It creates urgency when it would be wiser to wait. It creates fear when the path is opening. It creates discomfort when love approaches. Not because it wants to sabotage, but because it doesn't know what to do with the new. And this is where you need to teach your body to feel safe in frequencies it has never inhabited before. There's no point in saying, "I am abundant," if your body only knows how to react with contractions every time it looks at its bank balance. There's no point in saying, "I am worthy of love," if, when truly seen, your system sets off an alarm and begins to shut down. The field won't hear the phrase. It will hear the nervous signal behind your presence. And to change this sign, you need to start where it's simplest, the feeling. Don't think about everything you need to transform. Don't rush to more techniques. Don't drown in more theory. Just stop, breathe, and ask your body, what is the tone of the version of me that is already free? Not what it does, but what it feels, what it sustains, what it conveys without needing to explain. Maybe this version breathes more slowly. Maybe it speaks more slowly. Maybe it smiles more softly. Maybe it moves with more presence. Maybe it cries, but with relief, not fear. Now bring that feeling into the present. For 5 seconds, just 5. Not to stage, but to teach. Teach the body that there is another possibility, that there is a new vibrational reference. That it is possible to feel safe without contracting. That it is possible to receive without guilt. That it is possible to be seen without hiding. That it is possible to feel lightness without the panic that it will end. And that, as small as it may seem, is revolutionary. 5 seconds of true energetic coherence are more powerful than 5 hours of mental repetition. Because the field doesn't respond to effort, it responds to stable frequency. And stability is what happens when you stop abandoning yourself the moment you begin to expand. Training isn't about keeping your vibration high all the time. That's idealistic. Real training is about not to collapse into the old when the new begins to be born. It's about staying, breathing, integrating. It's about recognizing the old impulse and choosing something new. No rush, no performance, no pressure. The body learns through repetition. And now you're going to start repeating something different, a new gesture, an inner space that opens up. A pause where there was once urgency, a gentler touch on yourself, a deeper listening. And this is frequency. This is quantum language. This is real creation. Because the future you desire is already in the field. It doesn't need to be invented. It just needs to be received by someone who can support it vibrationally without sabotaging it at the first sign of discomfort. This someone is not a distant version of you. It is the you that is being born now. And it doesn't need to be discovered. It just needs to be embodied. And that begins in the body. It begins in practice. It begins in the space between the old impulse and the new response. It is there, in that microscopic interval, that time bends and the new collapses. There comes a time when you realize you no longer need to defend yourself. Not because the world has changed, but because you stopped vibrating like someone who is under attack. You no longer need to run, no longer need to explain, no longer need to prove. What was once urgency becomes presence. What was once a shield becomes open pores. What was once a battlefield dissolves. And it wasn't because you won, it was because you stopped fighting. You stopped feeding the pattern. You stopped responding to the same triggers with the same gestures. You stopped validating the same stories with your reaction. You stopped abandoning yourself every time the old emotion knocked on the door. And without your reinforcement, the pattern collapsed. Silently. Without applause, without warning, without noise. The collapse of the old is never dramatic. It's like an echo that no longer finds a wall to bounce off, like a frequency that suddenly has nowhere to rest. The old you still tries to react, but no longer finds vibrational ground, and the field notices. Because the field does not require intense manifestation. It requires signal clarity, and your birthmark is now different. Not because you've become someone else, but because I stopped performing the character that was needed for so long. That version of you that contorted itself to please, that justified itself to be loved, that withdrew out of loyalty to scarcity, that repeated itself because it was the only language I knew. This version isn't wrong, but it's no longer necessary. And what you realize now is that when you stop holding on to it, there's no emptiness. There's space, real space, clear space, fertile space, a kind of inner silence that feels strange at first, as if something is missing. But it's not absence. It is vibrational freedom, and it is in this space that the new begins to organize itself. Not with grandiose promises, but with subtle signs. A conversation that flows, an unexpected invitation, an unexplained sense of security. A moment when you listen to yourself and realize, I acted differently. A small, everyday miracle that doesn't come to prove anything to you. just to show you that reality is already responding. She didn't change because you demanded it. She changed because you no longer offer the same energy to collapse the old pattern. What happens here isn't something you control. It's something you allow. The field responds to the removal of its old signature as if it were a signal to restructure everything. Relationships begin to dissolve naturally. Opportunities arrive without the burden of searching. Emotions arise more lightly. And you begin to understand what once seemed like theory. The future is not something you pursue. It is something you become compatible with. And this compatibility is not intellectual. It is vibrational. It's the way you inhabit your body, the way you respond to life's touch, the way you breathe when no one is watching, the way you say no without guilt, the way you move in the world, truthfully, without asking permission, without waiting for approval, without the script that kept you in character. You no longer need the old plot. It starts to feel cramped, predictable, flavorless. And that doesn't make you sad, it frees you. Because you're not running away from it, you are deviating from it. And by doing so, you create a vacuum in the field, a space unoccupied by old expectations or conditioning, a space where no inherited frequency dictates the rhythm. And the universe doesn't tolerate vacuums for long. It fills, it responds, it rearranges. But now he's not filling it with your anxious requests. He's filling it with the reflection of your new stability. Because this is what you offer, coherence. And coherence collapses. Coherence dissolves loops. Coherence reorganizes time. Because in the quantum model, time isn't chronology, it's convergence. And when your mind, your body, your emotional state, and your presence converge, the collapse happens so naturally it seems like a coincidence. But it isn't. It's alignment. This is where you understand that you never needed to try harder. You never needed to be stronger. You never needed to heal yourself completely before experiencing the new. You just needed to stop feeding what was keeping you stuck. You just needed to become incompatible with the pattern that previously seemed inevitable. And now it dissolves. Because the echo finds no wall, frequency finds no receptacle, ancient time finds no collapse, and everything that seemed like your destiny starts to seem like just a place you passed through. You haven't reached a destination. You've crossed a threshold. There are no fireworks. There is no internal applause. There is no red carpet finish line waiting for you. There is just this new feeling, subtle, quiet, strangely silent, that you need to go back anymore. That the cycle, the one that seemed eternal, wasn't broken by force, but by a lack of interest. It simply no longer fits into who you're becoming. And perhaps that's the true miracle of vibrational change. It doesn't transform you into someone else. It just dissolves the layers you carried out of loyalty, out of fear, out of custom. And what's left, when all this is gone, isn't emptiness. It's authenticity. A version of you that doesn't need to perform elevation, doesn't need to prove transcendence, doesn't need to shout, "I've changed," because it vibrates change without needing to name it. You are already different. Not because he learned new words, but because he stopped repeating old ones. Not because he achieved something, but because they released what was preventing it. The field didn't need a new script. It just needed you to stop reinforcing the one that had already been overcome. Now you know. You know you don't have to wait for a big moment of collapse. Collapse happens in small decisions. The moment you choose not to shrink, in the silent gesture of staying present when the pain returns. In the firmly unspoken, in the lovingly spoken yes. The moment the old voice emerges and you listen to it without obeying it. This is the new frequency. It's not perfect, it's effortless consistency. A vibration that begins to become your default state, not because you struggle to maintain it, but because it has become more familiar than the old pattern of contraction. Safer than fear, more stable than drama, more true than character. And that's how the field begins to reorganize everything around you, without spectacle, but with precision. People arrive, others leave, doors open, some close naturally, but none of this defines you anymore, because you are no longer reacting to the world to remember who you are. You just are. You sustain. You breathe like someone who knows what they carry. And when the old pattern tries to return, because sometimes it does, you don't panic. You don't think you're going back to square one. You know it's just an echo, a pale reflection of something that no longer has a home. And you don't fight it, you just don't feed it. And what isn't fed doesn't survive. This is where everything changes. When you stop looking for the sign that the new reality has arrived and become the sign itself. When you understand that you don't need to convince anyone, not even yourself, because you are stable, vibrationally stable. Even if the world is still updating around you, even if the evidence is still on the way, you are not the one who waits, you are the one who sustains. And that is what the field honors. Now you know this. You know that real change isn't the kind that happens outside. It's the kind you can keep inside even when the world does not yet reflect. This is quantum maturity. This is vibrational individuation. This is being rooted in a new identity without needing validation to sustain it. You've made it this far. You've gone through the loops. You've recognized the signs. You've breathed at the threshold. You've educated your body. You've released control. You've vibrated differently, not forcefully, but coherently. And that's more than enough for the field to begin collapsing into aligned realities, not by luck, but by compatibility. So now, the question that remains is no longer, will it happen? The question is, will you continue to support who you already know who you are, even when the world doesn't yet know? Because if the answer is yes, then the cycle is over. Not because he left you, but because you stopped dancing with him. And this is the new song. You don't need to run anymore. You don't need to ask anymore. You just need to keep walking like someone who already lives outside the loop. Because now you know, the field responds to what you are, not what you demand. And you are, here, now, with everything you feel, with everything you release, with everything you finally no longer need to carry. Welcome to the new time.